don't let the journey for improvement be a tool to diminish your progress. Coming up on 35 years now, it's been wonderful. Even the struggles have been wonderful. And the idea of just, hey, I just want to keep learning here. If I'm not able to handle something right now, I won't handle it. But when the tools start to fall into place, the teacher arrives, whatever you want to describe it, all of a sudden that starts happening for me, and to accept that that's when it happens.
Welcome to Emotional Sobriety.
I'm a Giants fan ever since I was a little kid. My dad had season tickets. And
wow, you're serious. You're a serious Giants fan.
Yeah. I've got season tickets, and I go with my family members. And I've been to a Super
that's right, because that's when the Giants were playing. Here's when you contacted me.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. Yes, I knew that about you. Sorry.
Yeah, yep. No, it's great. So I've gone to road games. I've gone to the Super Bowl, so I'm really embedded. And I used to take all their losses personally. Like, I would walk out of the stadium, steam coming off my head. I would come home and I'd be sullen and grumpy towards my wife, and it would be like a 2-day hangover. And over time, this kind of emotional sobriety stuff has seeped in, and so I'm like, I take it as it is, and essentially, this, I may be disappointed, I may be embarrassed by how badly my team played, but it's not me. They didn't do this to me, right? And the emotional hangover that it results doesn't last as long.
Wow,
I'm with you. I've done the same thing with football my whole life. I grew up in an NFL family, and whoever I was rooting for, it could ruin a day, and that's just ridiculous.
And so I have a hierarchy of football resentments, meaning like teams I can't stand, teams I will never root for. So you say, like, who am I going to root for next? Well, I have to eliminate Philly and Dallas and San Francisco, and like I start to go down the list. Like, okay, who can I root for? Who's left?
I have teams I root against too. It's like it's like it is just an NFL football thing. It's like, and if somebody were to say we have to be so emotionally sober that we can't do that, then why watch football? It's like, we have, and they changed over the years, but because I'm from Texas, but I root against the Cowboys constantly. It's like they're just so overblown. They're not America's team. They're Texas. They're Dallas, Texas's team. So.
Well, I knew I liked you, Tom, and now I even love you more.
But the Chiefs are my backup team. I have a friend that lives in Kansas City. I love Patrick Mahomes. Now, this is a Texas thing. Patrick Mahomes was quarterback at Texas Tech, which is like about 40 miles from where I grew up. It's like he grew up in Tyler, Texas. It's like, I love watching that team play, and so I'm excited about them.
Yeah, he's a special talent, and that, again, that's a little bit more of this kind of maturity. Is like, I can appreciate their abilities, even though they're not on my team. Like the jealousy doesn't overwhelm me. So I'm wishing them harm.
Oh, that's a good point about just applying the kind of an entertaining but actually educational way of approaching emotional sobriety, because it's like, because as bad as you or I might have been at one time. I mean, we've both known people who were much worse, and that really are attached, and you couldn't convince them that it's not personal.
The types that get banned from stadiums, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Bad apples. And the whole and the whole superstition thing kicks in as well. It's like, well, I sat in this seat last time and I wore this hat and all that.
Man, if people don't know they're superstitious, wait till sports. It's like a friend of mine, I lost him a few years ago, but he used to or Patrick, I always talk about him. He's my friend Bendel. He's like, we used to talk about, we called it the jinxosphere. It's like, somebody be sitting there with us and say something like, well, we're right on the 5-yard line, we're bound to score. We go, fuck, you just stepped into the jinxosphere.
I love that term.
Well, just to give you
Yeah.
guys the heads up, we are keeping that part in because it's awesome. You guys are talking about
Okay.
emotional sobriety in
Oh,
sports,
good.
but
Good.
let's introduce Tom. We have Tom Potash here on the show, who's an institution at this point in our Thursday meeting, and runs some workshops about emotional sobriety. So
He's an institution. Wow.
institution, yeah, just like Allen Thom and other Tom anyway, Tom with an H. So yeah, Tom Potash, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you've come to these spaces?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited about this. And you stumbled initially with and mispronounced my name, and which brings up a whole other
Oh no.
thing. No. What's funny is this became a part of our group, the Thursday night group, where Alan was pronouncing me Tom Potash, which is not the pronunciation; it's Potash.
No. Yeah.
And what's funny is, like, for a long time I would let it slide because I don't care. But since it was like we're meeting every week and it was becoming part of the
I like that. By the way, emotional sobriety. Everybody alerted for emotional sobriety. Don't care about shit that you don't need to care about. I love that line from Potash. There he goes. I really didn't pay attention. Didn't really care about it because, well, I don't care. It's like I love that. It's like that's healthy apathy.
Exactly.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's just a good example. Yeah.
Yep. So I'm like, well, might as well correct him if I'm going to be sticking around for a while. So so my story is in a way I am a bit cliched, a bit average, but it's my story, so I feel special because of my lack of good parenting and direction and stability, because of the chaos that I experienced. I had these holes, and I was looking to fill them with whatever I could, and it was a lot of stuff before I picked up my first drink. It was, there was some food, I loved books, fantasy, take me out of where I am, TV, video games. I was an Atari kid, so I had that sore thumb, spent a lot of money in arcades as a kid, anything to kind of escape, right? Very natural, natural for us. But the experience of needing to fill these holes, it led me to alcohol and drugs, which in a way saved my life because I was really depressed as a kid. Didn't know why I was put on this earth to suffer. That was this all there is, was a common thought. And so, I started young. I started at age 10. I had my first drink and my first joint. I had older brothers, so that made it easy to kind of access, fall into the culture of the guys hanging out in the park. They looked cool. I wanted to be cool. I didn't feel cool, so I just followed their lead. And I kept down that road, and things escalated pretty quickly. I come from a family of alcoholics, addicts, and people with emotional disturbances. So it just kind of piled on, and along the way those holes were still there, right? It was just and I did a lot of clinging, a lot of replacement relationships, meaning like who's going to be my mommy, my daddy, my brother, since they're not around, and I was craving those types of relationships and connections. I wound up.
Well, it's like you said it beautifully a minute ago. You were trying to fill the holes.
Yep.
Yeah. I always talk about people. You don't just look at the places that are blatantly you've been abused. Look for those sins of omission. Those blank spaces. It's like it's kind of like you said. It's not as dramatic maybe, but it every bit as impactful on our souls.
Indeed. And thankfully, I had a very quick acceleration, and I wound up doing harder drugs and wound up getting arrested at age 18. you know,
I like that. I love your story, the way you do your story, because it's like, thankfully, I was really good at addiction, and I got really bad really fast. It's like, and of course, you know, if somebody would have said that to you at the time or anytime near or early recovery, you know, it's like nobody knows what that means. But from here, it's like, no shit, man. Get in there and if you're going to do it, get the job done so you can get started with the good stuff.
Exactly. I wound up at the same place, like wondering, is this all there is? Am I going to be, you know, Groundhog Day, living this, you know, day over and over again the rest of my life? And that despair and hopelessness was really my bottom, right? I was 18. I didn't have a wife and kids and, you know, those types of things. No one was taking away a house. I didn't, you know, because I didn't have one, you know, so it was really that emotional piece that drove me to my bottom. And I wound up in NA in rehab, 12-step fellowship type rehab and 12-step program. And which was great because it gave me that connection I had been looking for, right? That, you know, it's, community, like this is what I've been wanting, you know, some type of place of belonging. And that helped a little bit for a little while.
Well, let me just toss this in because as I'm learning more about you as we go through this, and it's like when you talked about your, you know, you before drugs, in terms of, I can't remember your exact words, but it was, you know, what's it all about, you know, kind of thing, and what is this worth it? I mean, and what I know, but this is not surprising to me from knowing you now, but you've been a philosopher from the beginning. You were born a philosopher. I mean, no, seriously, everybody is not necessarily, but you really speak from a philosopher's point of view, for both before the drugs and then when you get clean. You find, guess what? You're right back at that place. It's like, okay, now, okay, still I have no answers to what are we doing here?
Yeah,
and I, you know, and I know you're a student of philosophy like I am, and it's I mean, but it was like, that's not an accident. You were born that way, man.
Yeah, I you know, I've heard it termed a seeker, right? So I'm, you know, I identify with that. I took the advice of you know, many fellowships of take what you need and leave the rest. And that really was harmful to me because I didn't know what I needed. You know, like it was, I made the,
your suitcases were just bulging.
I didn't realize what I needed, and so I was taking the wrong stuff. You know, so I approached the 12 steps theoretically. It's like they're great in theory, but I'm not gonna practice them. And then I wound up, like 5 years in the program, had done like steps 1, 2, 3, and, you know, and not really done anything else formally. I was in therapy because I needed that desperately. But like everything was just, you know, oozing out of my pores. Those traps that I had laid in terms of emotional deficits and that I was looking for people to fill, they were like, you know, booby traps for people to fall into. And it wasn't pretty.
All right.
So 5 years in,
man, that's a great way to say it too. We not only discover our booby traps, but we are booby traps.
Oh yeah.
When we're that way. Wow, that's great.
Well, I described it as those Burmese tiger traps where like you cover it up with a thin layer so that people like
there I am minding my own business and whoop all the way in.
Just fall right in. Yep.
Amazing.
Well, let's welcome Allen to the program.
Word on the street is he's a good husband, and when he got home from the grocery, his wife was not able to be there to unload the groceries, so he unloaded the groceries before he came to the podcast. It's like those are points for just being a good person, good husband. So you know, not as flashy as being a skydiver, but.
No, right on. Your explanation's better.
So did I lose any points when I ran in the bedroom and said, "What the fuck you doing in bed?" No, I didn't.
Yeah, you did. But you gained points for admitting it. See how this works?
No, I walk in a you know, I called her before I was going home because I knew I was running tight. And I said, "Listen, can you come out and unload the groceries? I got to run up. I'll be late for the podcast if I try to unload." So I don't hear from her. So I walk in the door and there's the kids. They got popcorn, cookies out. I mean, they're having a wonderful time in the living room. Where's Mom? She's asleep. I go, what do you mean she's asleep? She goes, she's not feeling well. She's asleep. So I go back and she was gone, man. So we've been passing this bug around like the last couple of weeks, man. Cece threw up at school, had to bring her home. I think I had a touch of it. Maddie's had it twice. So it's a family.
My favorite part is how fast Maddie and Cece know what to do when Mom is unconscious. If Mom's unconscious, go get the shit out, man. Let's go.
Popcorn.
Oh, and listen, so I got one of these little labelers. We're trying to get organized with a few things. And I come in, there's two little labels thing, and it says shit on the labels. Man, he goes, I did those. S-H-I-T. She goes, I was going to do the F word, but I just decided to do shit. I go, thanks, man.
Oh, there you go. Let me catch
up.
As
long as no one gets labeled with that label.
That's right. That's right.
Very good. Hey, Tom, have you recovered? Yes. I was going to have to come over and do an intervention last night. How are you doing?
I'm fine. You missed Tom and I had a whole intro discussion about.
We're talking about it's very sad. But you know what he did, and this is kind of a weird thing on the podcast because I'm recapping the podcast for the people who are listening to the podcast, but in this case I'm recapping it for you. Is Tom immediately launched into emotional sobriety and being a sports fan. It's perfect. It was like he talked about something that's very familiar to me. Taking things way too personally, and not being able to experience the heartbreak of being a Giants fan, or in my case, a Titans fan, and just move on and keep going. So, and we also covered resentment inside sports, being a sports fan. Lots of you'll want to listen to this podcast, Alan. It's a good one.
I called Tom at halftime yesterday. I was worried about him. I thought at that point in time, he's going downhill fast. I mean, it was sad. He and his wife on speakerphone, and she reassured me that he was using the tools. He hadn't thrown any furniture around the house, wasn't cussing, wasn't swearing, was not in risk of relapsing. I said, okay, well, then he's all right. Then he's okay.
That's good. I think emotional sobriety is really as much or more philosophy than it is psychology. And I think Tom, you're a great example of that, because I mean, I think as you hopefully being a seeker has been one of the things that you've been, you like the rest of us, you've been finding much of what you're looking for in the program with emotional sobriety.
When I got into trouble around 5 years in the program, I went to Karen Foundation. They had a 5-day in-person, they called it a codependency treatment at the time. I think it's family treatment now, but it was great. It introduced me to all the kind of the deeper stuff that I needed to look at, and got me introduced to things like ACOA and CODA. And but I started really, I guess, understanding emotional sobriety and started to seek out emotional sobriety content around about 20 years ago, I guess it was. I heard a recording of Allen that a friend of ours brought into our accountability group, right? So this was a group of guys with 10 plus years in the program, and we got together every week, and he said, listen to this, right? And it was Allen's talk. He had just celebrated 30 years. I remember that at the beginning of the program.
That was a long time ago.
Yes. Right, 20 something years ago, and he was talking about emotional sobriety, and I'm like, ooh, like this is like starting to light up my brain here, and that started kind of a deeper dive, and I was going to AA at the time, introduced Bill Wilson's letter through Allen's piece, and then going further with ideas of the human condition was a big book for me, to discover more. Eckhart Tolle, A Course in Miracles, non-duality, just a whole slew of things. I found Allen's recordings on Monty's radio show, and so it was like Virginia Satir, and it just like every week you'd have someone new that you'd bring into that conversation in terms of your what you've brought into emotional sobriety, Alan, and I'm like, oh wow, this is great. Like the one thing that I love about it is, there's so many breadcrumbs that lead to and back from emotional sobriety into other areas, and that's the the philosopher seeker that you mentioned, Tom.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think about it the other way, though. I think all those crumbs lead to emotional sobriety. See, I think all those people were throwing out ideas, but somehow Bill captured and put them all together in the framework that he called emotional sobriety. It's so interesting to me, the synthesis of so many different philosophers, psychologists, spiritual teachers. They all are, it's like all 40 blind men holding an elephant and describing different parts, right? But somehow that schema, right? That and I think, Tom, we're going to do a whole podcast on emotional sobriety as a philosophy. That I really think that makes a lot of sense, right? Because you define philosophy, what is it? The definition of it that I just was looking up as we were talking is the study of the fundamental nature of knowledge, reality, and existence.
Well, and it also, it almost does. It doesn't cover the piece that definition doesn't cover the piece that I think is most important, which is what we talk about here most of all, and the thing I didn't get about philosophy when I was young and when I was a kid and thinking I was going to be a philosophy major or that kind of stuff is it's about practice. The practice of the philosophy. I practice. We all four of us. I know myself. I know I do. I know the three of you well enough to know that we could easily define what we do every day as practice our philosophy. We put it into play. Yeah. I know you're a fan from things you've said, like me, of Anthony DeMello.
Yes,
Tom. All of anything he wrote is amazing. But the book of awareness is like a book that I lost count a long time ago. How many times I reread that book? It's like, and you read it. It's like if it was a food, it would be so rich you could just take a couple of bites at a time. You could read a paragraph of awareness from Anthony DeMello and then just put it down and spend the day, enjoying it.
Well, what's DeMello's deal? What did he talk about?
What is this? Tom, I'll put that one to you. What's DeMello's deal?
Great question. He was a bit of a contrarian in terms of he was a Jesuit priest, if I remember correctly.
Yep. And outside the box.
And he challenged some of the concepts. And in the book Tom was talking about, awareness is a transcription of some talks that he gave, and his style is challenging. Like he confronts and asks the people to think about things differently. So instead of more of an approach of like, well, here's some ideas, you'd be like, no, this is all wrong. Right. What you're thinking, right. Here's really the idea around relationships and clinging and things like that really transform my perspective when I read it.
But also entertaining. See, that's the thing about it. I love the idea of somebody being able to be confrontive and entertaining simultaneously. I think Alan, you have that talent and skill set, and it's like, cause it's just just makes the medicine go down a little bit easier. But it's also when DeMello's are great because you never feel shamed by him. And I think that's any one of us is doing a good job. What we're doing, even if we're confronting something that we think somebody needs to look at, hopefully it's not carrying with it shame. People may be projecting shame onto it, but we're not bringing it.
One of the things,
Tom, I just wanted to ask before we moved on, what was it in the recording of Allen's that jumped out at you when you were working on some other part of recovery?
Wow, that was so long ago. It just felt like it's like oh, he gets it, right? It was like the
Right.
what, and I think that that's the biggest thing for me is there's some fundamental truths, and when someone just pulls that string, and it's like, oh, right. And so the talk about the emotional sobriety, about Bill Wilson's letter, there was a phrase which Allen used, which stuck in my head, which was defiantly self-reliant as a description of alcoholics. I love that.
Yes.
So the one thing which just to get back to DeMello for 1 second, which I loved, is part of the traps that I set for people is, we were talking about earlier, Tom, is my neediness, right? Like I was looking for someone to fill the lack that I had from my childhood. So there was a lot of clinging, a lot of problems with my people picker, right? Picking relationships that people were unavailable. And emotional sobriety has given me the freedom to observe that and to move on from that behavior. But DeMillo's article on clinging and the idea that we're all part of a symphony, and I'm going to paraphrase it here, that we get together, we make beautiful music. That's me and you and whoever else is in the room in this relationship that we have right now. But when you're gone, I'm not going to miss you. I'm going to miss some of the music. It was great, but I'm going to continue to go on and make music with myself and then with whoever else enters my life.
Others. Yes. Wow.
That idea of continuality, like I thought when people left that part, like that was a tragedy, that part of me couldn't go on because that relationship was gone. And the idea that there's this, really it's the long view. And that's why I love Michael Singer's new book, he Living Untethered. It talks about the big picture, right? The really, really big picture. It just helps put things in perspective. It's these relationships are going to come and go, and I have a choice today to embrace them or to cling.
Yeah, the differentiation comes up for me, because that was how I really when Alan was talking about differentiation in the Thursday groups. I would always apply that to the context of my romantic relationships, where I would just kind of become a empty man, because everything about myself I was identifying with this other that was kind of, maybe that person wouldn't be there, and then who would I be? And that's one area I think where emotional sobriety has come through for me a bit. Right.
Yeah, and the other's approval was basically the goal. I have to, my girlfriend, my wife has to be okay with me, which is a good idea in general, but not all the time.
Yeah, we don't always have control over what the other person thinks about us. But actually, often we don't.
You can take always and often out of that sentence. We do not. It's hard to say. Notice that you put those qualifiers in there. We don't control what other people think about anything. That's talk about the DeMello like confrontation. No, you don't. The only thing you control is you. Period. That's all.
That's an absolute right there.
That's right. There are not a lot of them, but that one is. It's you control two. I think of it. You control two things. You control how you interpret the world, and you interpret how you choose to respond. It's like, and to me, the first one I just mentioned was a life changer, and I think it's really become more of a big. I know it has become a lot more of a factor for me since we've been doing the emotional sobriety work, because it's that intrapersonal part where it's like, it's sure I have the ability to respond, and I have the choice to respond however I want to, but I also can change with again philosophically studying philosophy and changing within myself. I get to change how I interpret the world, and that's what we're talking about. When you're not taking something personally, you're changing. All you're doing is, I say all you're doing like it's a simple but not easy thing, definitely. But we're changing how we interpret that. The fact that the New York Giants lose the game is not on you, Tom.
Right. I had a mindfulness meditation course teacher. She's a descendant of, learned directly from John Kabat-Zinn, and she uses the phrase respond rather than react. And like that's another like thing that just like absolutely like stuck right in. It's like, oh wait, I can respond. I could even pause, as Bill talks about, and there's a difference between, because like all I knew was reaction to life, right? The emotions kicked in and it blurted out.
Reflex. Yeah, and I appreciate that, because I like to substitute the word respond for answer when we're talking about questions sometimes too, because sometimes there. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't answers, but a lot of times, the answer is we really limit ourselves. We say, what's the answer to this question? It's like, no, there's probably no, for most questions we can ask for ourselves in the process of our recovery and dealing with things as broad and as complex as emotional sobriety is. No, there are just multiple responses, and it takes such a weight off of my shoulders I mean, it's just kind of a connotation, I guess, in a way, but it's like, I don't have to have the answer. I just need a response.
And sometimes it's more questions, right?
Exactly. Boy, sometimes that's the best response. Yeah.
Tom, I wanted to ask the workshops that you do, or the classes, I suppose. Can you tell us a little bit about emotional sobriety in practice, and how you're communicating with the group about some of these things?
Yeah, I was honored. Allen had asked me to do book study on his book for the subscription study group that we have, and that happens before our Thursday night meeting. And what we've been doing is going through the chapters and going through the 12 principles. And what I'm trying to do is draw them out a bit more, right? Add my personal experiences to each of them, and then also tie in my experiences. So just like we did the chapter about not taking things personally a few weeks ago, how important is the 4 agreements to that, right? And how important is, as I mentioned, Michael Singer's approach to looking at the history of the universe since the Big Bang, right? Like, how can I take things personally when it took 13.8 billion years to get to this point? And how that starts to tie back to my philosophy of not taking things personally and emotional sobriety.
Single-celled organisms started dividing so that I could microwave some nachos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And do you get am I going to get upset if the cheese is not evenly distributed across my nachos?
Yes, the answer is always.
And that approach of I'm a preparer, right? So I love to do the seeking and the research and start to read some stuff. And so the idea of once a month putting together something for that group gets me going. Reread the chapter. I go out and I look, okay, what did Bill Wilson say about this? Who are the other authors I read that speak to me? I often talk about walking through my room. I've got some books behind me. I've got some books over here and in the other room. Like, I kind of walk through, like, who's going to call to me, as I think about these concepts and how do they apply. And
this is more a matter of a personal thing, but it's like, it's interesting because I mean, Allen and I have been doing this for a while, and Patrick and I are learning more about each other lately. It's like, and I go back to your metaphor of us of maybe, and we've used that metaphor too, of us as musicians that can play on our own or play with other people, but we have this band, and we have you sitting in with us today. But it's like, so it's amazing. I mean, I love the idea that there are how many different ways there are of being, and how rather than the way I learned and the way I did it with myself for so long was to judge them, compare them, all this other stuff. When you say I'm a preparer, it's like immediately the guy, I'm going like, I'm the opposite of that. It's like I couldn't prepare and I do try, but I'm not a preparer. It's like I can prepare things, but that becomes a different thing. It's like it's never going to apply to the thing I'm actually preparing for. And I love the idea. I love the fact that I could be in a place where I can enjoy that sense of opposite with you. I'm so different from that. And listen to you a little bit more about you just listen to you, how you describe that in terms of what that meant to you and how that process happens, because I don't have that experience. And it's like, and it's not a particular experience I seek anymore, but it's one that I realize is not natural to me. And I'm just finding it interesting instead of finding it a material to judge myself with.
Well, and what I think where I've developed more maturity in this area is if you ask me to talk about third step, I don't need to prepare, right? I'm coming up on 34 years clean and sober in February, right? I've done multiple readings and talks on the third step. But this area is a little different for me. So I do want to do more preparation. And then so like even for this podcast, I wrote some notes down about thinking about, what would come up. And so both in the idea of I've got some maturity here thinking I just can't wing it, right? And the idea that it's not going to be perfect the first time around, because this is the first time around, and not beat myself up over it. And to go, oh, this is room for growth, that I stumbled through this topic a bit more and I can go back and work on it better. I had a conversation with Allen at one point, and, like where I'd like to be in this, say, emotional sobriety community. And you, Tom and Allen, like this is your day job, right? You see clients, you read and research and put together material. My day job is completely different. So this is and you've been at it longer. So where I would in the past like have despair over this comparison of why can't I be like there already? I realize this is a journey, and this is part of the process.
Yeah.
Well, I'm impressed with just how you hit the ground running, and like you just the way my mind gets around how can I be this thing I aspire to be is you just start being it, and then let the labels fall into place in their own time. And it seems like you've been making a lot of progress on all these things.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. And I love that idea. It's like where I may want to be might not be where I wind up, but so let the labels fall in, as it progresses.
Yeah, I mean, where I have intended to be is very seldom in my life. Is very seldom where I've ended up, and it's like, and if you ask me, would you change it? At this point, I'm going, no. That's how I got here.
Hey, can I ask,
even the hard things? Yeah.
I hear a lot in recovery circles that everything happens as it's supposed to, or that some flavor of that. You know what I mean?
Allen,
or that like
Allen and I are both making faces.
No, but I hear it a lot. I hear it a lot.
Okay.
It's just when you're disturbed about something, it's like, well, no, this is the schematic that is all being executed perfectly, and it's me that is imperfect.
That goes to Dr. Paul Oliver's discussion of acceptance, and when his story was in the big book about it. Nothing happens in God's world that's a mistake. See, that's the theme that comes out of that, and it's very problematic. I mean, I think I tackle that very well in my new book about, especially when I'm talking about this one client who lost her child to cancer. Yeah. And when she would go to meetings and people would say that, hey, nothing happens in God's world by mistake, she'd look at them and say, see, you're telling me your God wants my daughter to suffer terribly from cancer? Well, if that's your God, I want nothing to do with that God. Are you kidding me that nothing happens in God's world by mistake? That idea may be comforting on certain issues, but it has limitations, man. Huge limitations.
Well, that's personal. that's not for me to, if this is, it's not my philosophy, but if it was, to not to push that on somebody else.
Well, but they do, you know that.
Oh,
I
I
mean,
know.
I mean,
yeah.
that is pushed on people all the time. I mean, there's not a lot of respect for boundaries in meetings. I mean, people think that I know the best way for you to live your life. I mean, look, Bill never intended the program for it to operate that way. It was very clear that your belief in God is your belief, and we don't have a right to put our belief on anybody else. He was very clear about that in matters of religion and stuff like that. It's not to bring Sunday into Monday at all. I mean, that's not.
Well, but it also is a great place to actually practice the sharing of experience, strength, and hope, because the alternate of that, which is, I mean, that's one of those that we hit a reflex and maybe all of us with that one. It's like, but one of the ways I've seen that happen is, and I'm just a pet peeve of mine when people say the question, what am I supposed to learn from this? I'm going like, what the fuck? Supposed to learn according to whom? It's like we live our lives as if we're trying to guess an answer, and later we're going to get it checked out with the answers in the back of the book. There's no fucking back of the book. Although I am thinking about writing a book called Answers in the Back of the Book.
It would blank in the back?
It would have different things like number 17 would be 45 and number 18 would be because that's the way it's always been done. We would just go on and on. But the point is, this is one of the things I'd love to do with this work. There's just a slight adjustment you can make to this and make it powerful, which is, what can I learn?
Yeah.
You put the power with yourself. Not what am I supposed to learn? What can I learn? Because all of a sudden, when we ask what am I supposed to learn, we're looking for one fucking thing. Right. It's like, what can I learn? That's a magnet question that we can continue to learn. I mean, we've all done it. Certain situations, aren't there circumstances in your life and things that you've learned in your life that you just keep drawing on because of you keep going back to, this is more of that, and it's like, what can I learn? Yeah.
Well, the way I describe that, Tom, now is because, we'll go off on this in a minute, but I describe that as the emerging opportunity for your next developmental step.
Yes.
See, that's what these things are. They are emergent opportunities, sometimes emergencies, but they're emergent opportunities for our next developmental step. And see, I've moved away so much from a model of pathology and what's wrong. And see, this is where I think I separate even from my experience with Living Untethered was very different than yours, Tom. I was very disappointed in the book. I thought he made a few good points in it, but I think he missed the mark big time in it. And I think where he's missing the mark is see a lot of the New Age people treat thoughts as random, that they're generated randomly, right, through life. And that what your job is to observe them and then just kind of go away from them. See, I think of them differently. I think our thoughts are not random. Our thoughts are a reflection of all our development, and the way we put together our life up to this point. So I give them much more meaning, right? Because to me, then, if I can give them that meaning, they can then help me. They almost like they provide a compass.
Well, I was going to say they're a pointer, right?
They're a pointer, man. See, and this is the difference, and that's where I think that in it, it's an important difference, because this is where psychology is different than some of the New Age spirituality stuff that's going on. Very different.
Yeah.
To me, it's much more existentially grounded. Meaning it's grounded in our existence. It's grounded in the experience we have and what creates this existence we're having. So that's one of the points that I diverge from him. But I have really shifted. I don't think of pathology anymore. I don't think of what's wrong with people. I think of what's next for people. That's my whole orientation now. It's not what's wrong with you. It's what's next for you. And our job is to try to find a way to show up and be able to be present for that next in our life.
Well,
And
I think
that's not easy, man. That is not an easy thing to do.
well, we talk about, when there's trouble, it's not really trouble, right?
Yes.
It's an opportunity. And I love that. Like, again, like this is the growth. Like when things started bubbling up, I shut down, right? Because I didn't want to look at it, I went la 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 la. And now it's sort of like, whoa, what's going on there?
Now, even that idea. So this is another idea I challenge people. I'm not so sure you didn't want to look at it. See, one of the things I have discovered is that if we don't know how to deal with something, then we aren't going to look at it, because we are not going to put ourselves in a position of helplessness. You're not going to volunteer for that role. So what happens is it's called, in psychology, we call it selective inattention. You won't pay attention to things that you can't do something about. I mean, you're just not going to do it. We're just way we're wired is we're not going to throw ourselves into that fire pit, right? And not have a way to get out of it. As soon, and this is what I've seen, and Tom, I think you've seen this too, as soon as you help someone develop an ability to support themselves better, then they can start to face things that before they couldn't face. And it's because now they have, let's call it some faith or even confidence that, you know what, if I embrace that upset right now, if I really hold still and feel that pain, something nourishing can come from this experience. Before it is, if I face that, all I can do is feel bad. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to turn lead into gold. I have no idea on what that alchemy looks like, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to avoid the heck out of that stuff. And I'm just going to try, and this is where we're driven for comfort. I'm going to try to stay in my comfort zone. I'll deal with what is. And that's why I think it's so exciting. As soon as people get these new ideas, we see it on Thursday night all the time. They start dealing with stuff in ways that they've never dealt with them before, because they have a sense of what to do with it. And that's what Dr. Kempler used to teach me all the time. He says, Allen, he says, sometimes the best diagnosis for a problem is ignorance. People just don't know. They just don't know. Nobody's taught them. Nobody's helped them see. Nobody's educated them. There's just a lack of information about what is needed.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, until some foundation is in place, and then some additional, it's like a buildup, right? Exactly.
Then you start to look, you're more honest than you've ever been in your life.
Right.
Not that the stuff that you're honest about has changed. It's what's changed is your ability to be honest with yourself about these things and support yourself without turning against yourself. I love how Roger started out the discussion of step 5, right? Admitting to God, to ourselves, another human being, the exact nature of our wrong. How is it? Who wants to be honest about these things?
Right. How could that possibly help our self-esteem is what he said. It was beautiful.
For me to admit all of these terrible things about myself. How can
That's right.
That's right. See, it's counterculture. All the stuff we're doing is counterculture. We're going against.
Well, and it's counterintuitive until we have a broader frame, it's always about growth. I always say growth is always from the inside out, so it's always about expansion. It's never about limiting. It's always about more. And you talk about that all the time. You talk about more self, more this, and what and the reason and the way that you and I've talked about not thinking in terms of pathology is we're not the lone rangers in this. There are a lot of wonderful people out there helping other human beings that do that. It's like you assume that whatever people is doing or making sense. And they may not understand how it makes sense, but you and I have said on this podcast before, probably multiple times, that what we do for a living is we help people see that they're not crazy, rather than figure out what brand of crazy they are. We show people how they make sense. It's like, well, of course you're this way. Of course you have this belief, or of course you have this fear, or of course you avoid the crap out of this thing because look at what your history is. And once we understand ourselves at that level, we're better at getting our own needs met.
One of yesterday's readings, I don't know if it was a Hazelden or the AA, talked about, we had abnormal thinking, right? And we start to sober up and we gain normal thinking. I'm paraphrasing it here.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, what it was is there was this comfort that I thought I was defective in some way. And then I came into fellowship and it's like, oh, all of a sudden my abnormal thinking is not so abnormal because collectively, people are having the same type of thoughts. And then it shifts into a healthy abnormal where we start to talk about things like humility, about this, like trouble is not always trouble. I start to gain some new concepts about how I can approach life through emotional sobriety that, is abnormal from, where I started off from. And it becomes a strength in a way.
Well, everything is information that we can use. It's like that's the piece. It's like because Alan's saying we our unconscious defense mechanisms, when they're working correctly, they will take it. If our experience is that we can't make use of something, we're gonna try to block it out. It's like, but once that's part of the bigger frame. Is by the way, even information that involves difficulty, distress, and pain is useful to us. And when we know that becomes a part of our definition of ourselves as healthy people. So it's like what the little heading I have on my website is, I found something that is more important to me than happiness, and it's a little bit more than this, but ultimately the short version is it's self-respect. I'm a big fan of happy. I like having a good time. I like being happy, but it's like at the end of the day, the measure, and at the end of our lives, the measure is our own self-respect, our integrity. And that's what we're shooting for that's what we're doing one day at a time. And this is one of this is what I love about this isn't the only place you find it, but I'm a fan of Stoicism, that philosophy, mm-hmm. and it's just repeated over and over and over again. They never miss an opportunity to remind us that we're going to die, and they always do that, and they point out that basically our job is to be the best version of ourselves we can be every single day. And that I love the simplicity of that, and it will keep you busy for the rest of your life.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I love Bill Wilson's 12 and 12. The theme, or one of the themes that's very persistent through it, is humility. So I can't be the best person, a best version of myself until I've got a clear picture of myself at any given time, and humility being, both an accurate self-assessment, but also, hey, where can I go from here? And I think that aligns really well with that Stoic philosophy.
Yeah. Well, and it's what Alan was saying. If you look at the schools of wisdom and the schools of philosophy and stuff like that, it's like they're just different words. What it all leads to is wisdom and maturity.
Well, let's have Tom back for our sister episode where we get into emotional sobriety and philosophy.
The philosopher
Tom. Before
Tom.
we stop, is there anything you wanted to share with people that are just coming into this area and learning about emotional sobriety? Any tips you want to give them, or experiences you've had that just before we wrap up today?
Thank you for putting me on the spot.
Well, I love doing that, by the way. That's why I love calling you at halftime yesterday.
I think that, and Tom has said this in a variation, in that our negative self-talk, attends the same meetings we do, right? Reads the same self-help books we do. I said, don't let the journey for improvement be a tool to diminish your progress. I've had a few times along the way where it's like, I should be better at blank, or I can't believe I fell in that hole once again. Coming up on 35 years now. It's been wonderful. Even the struggles have been wonderful. And the idea of just, hey, I just want to keep learning here. What can I what can I pick up from here? And I couldn't do this at 5 years clean, 10 years clean, 12, like there's a reason. I think, Alan, you described it well about, when the willingness and the ability or to expand and experience something happens. And if I'm not able to handle something right now, I won't handle it. But when the tools start to fall into place, the teacher arrives, whatever you want to describe it, all of a sudden, that starts happening for me, and to accept that that's when it happens.
Tom, what I think what my simplistic summary of what you just said is a tip is so important. Be kind to yourself.
Absolutely.
Be kind. Be as kind to yourself as you would to a friend of yours. Yeah. I call it the reverse golden rule. Treat yourself with the same respect that you would someone else.
And be aware when you don't, what's going on. See, that's the thing, is that we don't want to set it up that if you're not kind to yourself, that you're failing. No. It's an awareness. And that's the exciting thing about this whole thing, is that awareness, getting in touch with what you're doing to yourself is a prerequisite to change it. Mm-hmm. Until you accept and own what you're doing, there's no possibility of changing that. Yeah. And so being aware, my God, I'm criticizing myself all over the place. Mm-hmm. Go with that for a minute. Look at how critical you are. Look at what all those shoulds are. When you do that, then you create a possibility of letting them go. That's the kindness, is give yourself room to be aware of it, to process it, and see and accept what you're doing, and see what you're doing to yourself. Because at that moment, then you open up the door with your willingness to start changing.
Tend your life, tend your myth, cultivate your narrative with whomever you're with. Then with glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me. It ain't a crime to be a human. Never be ashamed to be yourself. Rest assured that whatever you're doing will entertain me like nobody else. So here's to us, my old friends, until it's time to drink the wine and break the bread again. With glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me.